So, it's common to hear folks say things like, there's no atheist community, and saying atheist community is like saying non-stamp collector community. I don't see one. And on the surface, this is understandable. You generally don't see a community of non-stamp collectors or non-believers in Bigfoot. But can we say the same for atheists? Now here on screen right now is a number of different examples of atheists saying that there's no atheist community. By definition, there's no atheist community. There's no atheist community. It's there on screen, right? So first we have to examine what is a community. A community is a group of people living in the same place, having a particular characteristic in common. The condition of sharing or having certain attitudes and interests in common. We can see from that definition that aside from the group living together, we can see any group that has similar characteristics, attitudes, and interests in common would fit the definition of community, that is. So what is an atheist? Now, atheism is polysemous, and even among atheists, there is a disagreement about how it ought to be defined. Now, you guys know my preferred definition, but just speaking in general here, there are two qualities that unite atheists: that they don't believe in any deities and that they identify as atheists. But those two things are not exactly enough to pronounce an atheist community. So what could people mean by atheist community? So in social media, we can see atheists acting like a community, often doing these things. For example, debating theists, using memes in arguments, joining atheist groups or atheist versus theist groups, being outspoken about theism and atheism, saying things like, there's no atheist community, watching atheist YouTube shows. Now, the YouTube shows bring me to another point. The atheist experience is produced by the ACA. And so what's the ACA? Well, that stands for the Atheist Community of Austin. Community. It's right there in the name. A community of atheists. So it's kind of odd that a group of people claim that there's no atheist community and watch a show produced by an atheist community, right? Now, this particular person here was even responding to Matt Dillahunty, who was the former president of the Atheist Community of Austin, saying that there's no atheist community. So there's other atheist YouTube shows. There's quite a few big names in the atheist YouTube circle, and you'll find a lot of the same names in the audience. The same popular names promoted around and guests on those channels, and all discussing similar ideas in a similar way with similar conclusions. It sounds like they have similar attitudes and interests, no? Atheist events. There are many atheist events hosted around the world, from bigger events like Atheist Day hosted in Texas to smaller events like Skeptics in a Pub. These events have groups that they're attached to online, so these like-minded people can continue to hang out virtually after the live event. Then there's atheist...
they've got faithful... Oops, sorry. I was just going to say, going back to atheist events, there's Faithless Forum next week.
Oh, where's that one?
Week. Somewhere in America.
I know there's the...
I've just seen it being mentioned.
Fair. I know they do the Atheist Day sort of Texas as well, so... Yeah. So there are plenty of them. I'm sure you guys can actually think of some yourself as well and actually go, oh yeah, well technically that would count as a community. So there's atheist literature and merchandise. So from the heavy-hitting philosophical content from Oppie to the more popularized content from folks like Dawkins, Harris, and Ra. Now this actually, I don't know why it's broken, but they were links to books on Amazon, so I'll have to sort that out later. But if I remember, it was the first two were Oppie, The Best Argument Against God, and Introduction to Atheism, or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Then we had a Harris book, a Dawkins book, which was The God Delusion, and a Ra book, which was his creationist one. I forget the title of that one as well. Foundational Falsehoods. Book called
A Manual for Creating Atheists.
That would be brilliant. It was Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism. So you would actually be hard pressed to find an atheist that hasn't read something from at least one of them, and they probably follow them on social media. Now, they may not have followed all of them. They might have attitudes where they don't like, for example, Aaron Ra for whatever reason. They like Oppie, or it might be the other way around. You know, there can be this divide. They can prefer a particular atheist author. Well, you know, I like reading fantasy as well, and I have particular favorite fantasy authors. That doesn't mean that if I joined a fantasy community that I would be extradited because I don't like certain ones. But anyway, speaking of that sort of thing, tribalism. Another thing to note about communities is they start to build an in-group versus out-group mentality. Consider how you might say someone very much in love with their guns that you think there should be a few more restrictions and checks on the people that want guns, and all they hear is, "I want to take your guns," instead of hearing what you're actually saying. The same can be said in the atheist community. There are common catchphrases and memes thrown around, but it seems like to be a free thinker, you have to think like all the other atheists, or you'll be labelled, as we often are, theist trolls, crypto-theists, cult leaders, or apologists. Without a community, this sort of othering can't actually happen. So it's another indicator that there is indeed an atheist community. There's a link to an article that goes into a bit more detail about tribalism. So, addressing some comments related to the atheist community. Whilst I was writing this article, which was influenced by a few face desks of atheists claiming there was no atheist community, a joke from Dallas Wade, atheist, YouTuber, and all-round decent bloke, popped up in my newsfeed. There are several responses that seem to reflect common attitudes in the atheist non-community. So here he said, "Do atheists believe there is no atheist community, or do they just lack belief in the atheist community?" Which I thought was absolutely brilliant, because obviously, if you're unaware, which I'm sure you are, this relates to the ongoing debate about the definition of atheism and whether it should be thought of as a positive belief or whether it is just a lack of belief. As I hadn't published that yet, I thought maybe I should address some of the comments in that thread, and some that I'd seen elsewhere as well. You could probably tell from the date and who they're responding to, if I've left that in, which ones are from where. So, there is no atheist community. There may be groups of folks that happen to be atheists, but atheism is not an organisation or a denomination. And Danny says, "There is no atheist movement. There isn't even an atheist community. There are cliques of atheists on Twitter, but Twitter isn't real life. These are stupid things theists say to try and equate atheism to a religion." So this does seem to be a common fear. Apparently, declaring something a community is the same as it being a religion. What? Also, no one is claiming atheism is an organisation or a religion. I mean, some people do, but in general. Just that there are atheist communities. The irony of one of those, again, is responding to Matt Dillahunty, which we addressed earlier. So, I mean, is there anything you guys want to pick out from there?
Yeah, a couple of things. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, should we read through the article completely and then
get it?
Or like, I don't know how best to do it. What do you think, Joe? Because you know what's coming up.
I mean, I'm happy either way. If you would rather I just read through the article and we addressed everything at the end, that's fine. I don't know.
Maybe it would be easier then to discuss, like without feeling the need to have something sort of suspended,
okay,
or left something sort of to finish.
All right. We'll blitz through it as fast as we can then. Sorry?
No, nothing.
Okay. So, why would there be an atheist community? We are the normal people whose only distinction is we aren't a brainwashed cult members who deny the existence of reality. Not much to build anything on. Now, humans are a tribal species. We group together because it helped us survive over the years. Why is there a black community? Why is there a Star Wars community? Wendy, your comments about being normal people and them being brainwashed cult are completely toxic and something I wish wasn't present in the online atheist community. Atheism doesn't need a community. It's the default state of every single human ever born. Some people are ripped from normal society by brainwashing. What it is needed are deprogramming communities to help return them to us. No. Maybe atheism doesn't need a community, but the people, as in the atheists, do. It's hardwired into us. The default state argument shows bad epistemology, and again, the comments show and attitudes show a general toxicity. And something else that is saying there, a deprogramming community. I mean, is that basically a different word for an atheist community? Because what would that deprogramming community be? It's not going to be theists, is it? Well, a community of atheists that just call themselves deprogrammers. Okay. There are communities that are made up of atheists, but I wouldn't say there's one overarching atheist community. Well, does there need to be, Mikey? Even in massive organizations like religions, there is very rarely a single overarching community. Why do you think there are so many denominations? Religious communities, by nature, shut out those unlike them. Communities are cliques, and atheists don't feel the need to be in one. That's an interesting take, Leon. A clique is a close-knit group of people that doesn't really allow folks to join them. I'm not sure this applies to a community. Consider the Christian community. They're very much accepting of new members. So, how are they a clique? Now, I know some Christian communities might be a little bit more guarded and closed off, maybe thinking you're an evil atheist or something like that, but in general, if you can demonstrate that you are part of that community, they'd be happy to have you in their ranks. I think what you mean, though, is it's clique-like behaviour. Essentially, our tribal nature, right? With the fact that I and other atheists with an above-average interest in philosophy and positive discourse with theists are frequently othered by the online atheist community, it seems like that this fits your definition of being shut out by those unlike them. So, are you saying atheist communities are religion? I mean, I know that's not what you're saying, but there's sort of a little logical entailment in there. I don't believe there's an atheist community, I believe there's a humanist community. And whilst I don't disagree that there's a humanist community, I wouldn't say that all atheists are humanists, though many do see themselves that way. And in fact, I think you've identified another behaviour of the online atheist community. They often believe they are humanists, even if they don't act that way. The problem with calling something an atheist community, to me, is that it brands all atheists into the same mould, saying that theist community feels silly. I don't know why that would even apply to atheism. It also feels like an exclusive term that is far too broad to be exclusive. So, what, you mean like many of us atheists actually do to theists? We argue against a literalist take on the Bible and claim that it's proved the Bible false, or claim theism religion is a delusion or a mental illness? I mean, it sounds like you're afraid that theists will do what we incorrectly do to them. Again, is every community the same? By definition, there is no atheist community. In the same way, there is no people who don't wear purple community. People are united by beliefs, not their absence. Do you mean like the belief that there's no atheist community, shared among many internet atheists and some of the others I mentioned previously? I mean, I do get what you're saying, Julian. Atheists strictly only have one commonality, but our tribal nature has brought us together in various communities, and unfortunately, especially online, we've ended up with a lot of atheist echo chambers. So I would suggest you check this video. It's Dave's. There are so many more of these bad takes that you see online. It really does puzzle me that atheists are so desperate to not have anything to do with religion or theism that they end up making these awful statements like there's no community or they hold no beliefs. Whilst I have anonymised these comments, I felt the need to respond to some, especially the condescending attitude some folks have taken. It's bad enough when someone is condescending and patronising, but to be wrong at the same time is so much worse. Thank you, Dallas, for letting me quote you. Hopefully, folks will check you out on Twitter and YouTube, and there's a link to his channel right there if you would like to see it. So in summary, whilst there may not be a community local to you, and simply being an atheist doesn't mean you're instantly in a community, there are communities of atheists. These communities are mostly online, though are not limited to online exploits. To say there is no atheist community seems to be a misunderstanding of what a community is. We atheists have a community, whether we like it or not. In fact, there are multiple atheist communities, just like there are multiple Christian communities. There may not be an overarching set of rules and governance that you might find in a religion, but then do you think the black community have these rules either? Why does there have to be one overarching community for something to be considered a community? If that was the case, there would be no communities. The fact is, there are atheist communities, and if you're an atheist that tends to debate theists online, whether you like it or are even aware of it, you're in a community. Here's a number of posts about atheism. There's you, Philip. And this was a video on Bearded Heretics channel about the atheist community and what the problem is, and I'd suggest you take it. Now, that was the end of the article before I posted it around the web. And, well, let's just say the article got a few responses. If you've reached this section, you found the mystical bonus section. Perhaps I'm overselling it, but I thought it might be good to present some of the reactions to the article we've had since it's been posted. Please note, this is not an exhaustive list, and I've had some really great responses and conversations about it, but these are a few that might need a little bit more thought. Francois says, lol, we don't need to congregate once a week to be reminded that we don't believe in a god. Once you uninstall an app, you don't get notifications that you need it updated. It's theists that need to be reminded weekly that they do. That's how brainwashing works. Constant reinforcement. I mean, to that I said, tell me you've not read the article you're responding to without telling me you've not read the article. As for constant reinforcement, you mean like so many atheist YouTubers, bloggers, and parties keep reinforcing atheism is only a lack of belief in God? Graham, those are definitely words constructed to appear as a sentence. I mean, does anyone...
Pretty sure it was a lot of sentences.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you missed out a bit, Graham, I think.
Does anyone else find this incredibly disappointing? It seems that he read as far as the featured image and seemingly couldn't understand it. The featured image is, of course, a joke about how many atheists claim to only lack a belief in gods and not actively disbelieve, but applied to the atheist community that many folks say does not exist. I wonder why this has to be explained to a group of people that pride themselves on their thinking abilities. Ray, there are many atheist communities, there's certainly no one overarching community. And I mean, this is a fair point, Ray, one addressed in the article, and I'm unsure that you bring it up because you didn't read the article or if you're agreeing with the article, but to reiterate this point, there is no overarching black community, Star Wars community, or even Christian community. It doesn't stop things from being a community. Lewis, sure, there's such a thing as an atheist community, but what we must consider is what a theist means when referring to the atheist community. I think many theists, when speaking of an atheist community, have in mind that an organised force is set to burn down all the churches. To be fair, they may well mean that. I think the problem is assuming that they mean that. Wouldn't it make sense to ask them what they mean instead of saying that there is none? Why assume the worst possible reading of someone's statement? Surely we should all learn to both clarify and steelman. I did have a brief chat about this one with Lewis, so my comments here are less directed at him and more in general. There is a lot of fear in the atheist community, that doesn't exist, of being seen in the same way as religious folks. This is why irrational statements like, I don't have any beliefs, I don't believe in evolution, I accept it as true, or there is no atheist community seem to come from. I can understand your distaste for religion, even if I don't share it as passionately as you. But why should that mean we then make these sorts of statements? Brandon, Perhaps there should be equal scrutiny on the word "the" when referring to the atheist community. Now, I did have a great mini-chat with Brandon about this, and he made some good points. The thing I wanted to address here is the inference. I understand that we might infer the atheist community seems to be suggesting this singular monolithic thing, because that is how it sounds. A community versus the community does sound different. I think the problem is the inference we make. If I am online talking about the atheist community, I'm speaking of the internet atheist community. And by that, I'm being broad, as there's lots of different types of atheists that could fall under this category. Now, I might be more specific. I could be talking about the Twitter atheist community, for example. I may need to specify further and say the Lacktheist atheist community, or philosophical atheist community, American atheist community, or the new atheist community, and so on. But in general, I would be talking about all these types of atheists that have atheistic discussions online. If I say that there's a problem with logic or misogyny in the atheist community, that isn't saying all atheists are acting this way. This is me highlighting an issue that seems to be quite prevalent in said community. I don't think we need to say not all atheists, just like we don't need to say not all men in similar discussions. I also don't think we need to say there's no atheist community in response to this. One point Brandon did make in our chat is there's little point in making such general statements. To paraphrase, in the same way that atheists are diverse, so are other communities. There's little point in addressing the Christian community or black community without the additional context. And I can't say that I disagree with this point. Perhaps with people's tendencies to infer things, like I mentioned above, and not clarify what people mean, perhaps on Twitter, instead of saying the atheist community, we should say some of the Twitter atheist community. This is something I need to think about and perhaps test to see if it actually changes the interactions. The only issue with Twitter is obviously the character account, which is why many things do get shortened down. So what do you think? What do you think of the article and the responses? Have you changed your mind? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Why and why not?
I thought it was a great article.
Yeah, I thought it was really, really good. Like, I think you went through a lot of different sort of nuances about how the discussion may develop, you know, the different takes that people have, and responded to each, I think, in a very reasonable way as well. So I really enjoyed the article. I'm a bit like, maybe we should have stopped now that, you know, that we read through the entire thing, because now I realize that it was actually there was a lot there, and maybe it would have been better to split it up. But I guess it's still like, I guess I forgot a few things that I wanted to say before, but I think they'll come to mind when we start discussing the topic.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'll quickly switch things back. Guys, if there's any chats, let me know. Like, if you've made any questions or comments, you guys out there, then please, like, say them again, copy and paste, because I would very much like to address any comments. I will try and obviously scroll back up, but if you wouldn't mind asking the questions again, that would help me greatly. I'm just going to put things into Be Right Back, and then we will get on with the conversation.